The Old West has become synonymous with grit, wide-open horizons, and outlaw legends. But behind the clinking glasses in the saloons and the high noon showdowns, there are mysteries that defy logic and span generations. Amid all the romanticized memories, there are still puzzles that keep anyone brave enough to look digging for answers. Over the next few minutes, we're going to dive into 10 stories that mix myth and reality, uncovering hints of buried secrets across the vast plains of this iconic setting. Get ready. Each tale swings open a door that time tried to lock shut, and you just might find more than you bargained for. Butch Cassidy is one of the Old West's most famous outlaws, a reputation that blew up worldwide thanks to the movie with Paul Newman and Robert Redford. The popular story goes that after a string of robberies in the 1890s, he and his partner, the Sundance Kid, crossed into Bolivia, where they supposedly were killed in a shootout with authorities. But the official version has its holes. Cassidy's sister Lula claimed she ran into him at a family gathering in 1925. She said he talked with relatives, even their dad, decades after his alleged death in 1908. Other acquaintances say they bumped into him around the same time, and some historical records hint that the fatal shootout might have happened while the gang was splitting the take from a heist, throwing the timeline even more out of whack. Some people insist Cassidy slipped away, gave up crime, and lived quietly for years in Paraguay, Chile, or even Spokane, Washington. That theory got a boost when former Bolivian President René Barrientos said the famous shootout was staged. Meanwhile, the Pinkerton Detective Agency, the ones who'd been on their trail for ages, maintained that Cassidy and Sundance actually died in Uruguay. Adding another layer to the mystery, Lula claimed her brother held out until 1930, eventually dying of pneumonia back in the U.S. 2 bodies found after the Bolivia clash were never officially identified as Cassidy and Sundance, and some speculate that in desperation, he shot his partner to avoid capture. With conflicting accounts, scattered clues, and contested official statements, Butch Cassidy's true fate remains one of the Old West's biggest enigmas, and every new lead just makes the story more fascinating. Cochise was one of the Apache chiefs who really defined the clashes between North America's indigenous peoples and European settlers. Yet almost nothing is known about his early years. His story only starts to come into focus around the mid-1800s, when he was already leading the Chiricahua band living between northern Mexico and the southern Arizona territory. For years, Cochise led raids and ambushes to push back settlers. That campaign only ended when a treaty set aside part of his people's southeastern lands. 2 years later, in 1874, he died before he could really enjoy that short-lived peace. They buried him in the Dragoon Mountains, but the exact spot was never shared publicly. Only a handful of his closest followers were there, and they kept it secret. One story goes that they even put his horse and dog in the grave with him, so neither would roam off looking for him, and so no one else could ever disturb his final resting place. The mystery of the lost cement mine. The promise of a gold vein so rich it could change lives has been drawing explorers since the mid-1800s. One of the oldest versions, recorded in 1879, says that back in 1857, 2 travelers headed for California broke off from their wagon train to rest by a creek. There they stumbled on an unusually rich vein. Convinced they'd hit the jackpot, one of them stuffed about 5 kilos of gold into his pack, but his luck ran out soon after. He got sick on the trip, and as soon as he reached California, he had to sell the gold and a hand-drawn map of the site to pay for his medical bills. Another tale, shared by Mark Twain, features 3 German brothers. Fleeing an attack on their wagon train, they took shelter in the mountains, and by pure chance, ran into deposits just like the first story. Every new version fueled the belief that somewhere on the slopes of the Sierra Nevada, there was a deposit as generous as it was hidden. As the rumor gained steam, adventurers from all over tried to track down the mine. One of the few solid clues came from Dr. Randall, who reportedly found a red rock studded with gold in the same area. Between 1869 and 1877, two men showed up in Stockton each year flashing an unusual haul of nuggets. On his deathbed, one of them told a priest that he and his partner had pulled gold from near Mammoth Peak, then called Pumice Mountain, and had pulled out about $400,000 over the years. The exact spot wasn't on any known map, kept secret by those in the know. Even though nobody's ever pinpointed the lost cement mine, the legend helped fuel the gold rush and indirectly pushed prospectors toward Bodie, where over 28,000 kilos of gold were eventually found. The trail, though, is still out there, waiting for the next treasure hunter ready to crack the mystery. JeanBaptiste. It all kicked off in 1862, when Salt Lake City's calm was torn apart by a shocking accusation. The local gravedigger, JeanBaptiste, wasn't just burying bodies. He was looting them. When they searched his home, they found piles of clothes taken off the dead, and folks were left reeling between disgust and a demand for justice. For a crime that bizarre, Brigham Young tried to soothe the faithful by promising that on Resurrection Day, everyone would rise fully clothed, even the ones Baptiste had stripped. The verdict came almost as fast as the outrage: deportation to a lonely island in the Great Salt Lake. He was stranded there with barely any supplies, and since he couldn't swim, it looked like a life sentence. But a few weeks later, the pastors sent to check on him came back with a twist. The prisoner had disappeared. From that point on, theories ran wild. One says he tried to swim to freedom and drowned. After all, a skull showed up near the Jordan River's mouth, and later a skeleton chained together fueled the idea he'd tried and failed to make it across. There's no proof he was still chained when he was left out there, though. Another line of thought is that he actually pulled off a clever escape. Supposedly, he used boards from his shack and calf skins to build a raft, paddled to shore, then hopped a train to California, or slipped into mining camps where nobody bothered asking questions. Over time, the rumors only got wilder. Some swear Baptiste was captured years later, mutilated and branded as a grave robber. What's fact and what's myth? Salt Lake City never got a straight answer, and JeanBaptiste's name still rings out as an open invite for more speculation. Tom Horn, the gunslinger turned defendant. In 1980, Steve McQueen brought Tom Horn to the big screen, showing a man who sometimes upheld the law and other times bent it to suit himself. Decades earlier, in the 1890s, the Old West was dealing with a different drama. Cattle ranching, once a sure path to riches, was stuck in a slump. Still, ranchers kept buying herds and sinking deeper into debt. Rather than admit they'd been wrong, they picked a scapegoat: cattle rustlers. To solve the problem, they hired men like Horn. He'd ride in, take care of business, and ride off, leaving a trail of terror. His reputation for fast, lethal work spread quicker than any horse. Few dared question his methods, even though the human cost was obvious. That fearsome rep collided with 14-year-old Willie Nichols' fate when he was shot dead near his family's ranch. The shock turned to panic. If even kids were targets, nobody was safe. Soon, Marshal Joe LaForce zeroed in on Horn as the perfect suspect. He hauled him in for questioning. Word is Horn, drunk, let slip remarks that people took as a hidden confession. That was enough to send him to trial. At the trial, the defense argued there was only circumstantial evidence. Still, the jury found him guilty, and the gallows sealed his fate on November 20th, 1903. Almost a century later, a mock jury revisited the case and found gaps pointing to a different story. To this day, nobody's nailed down who actually pulled the trigger on Willie Nickel. But Tom Horn's name still hangs between myth, fear, and doubt, ready for the next chapter. Albert Fountain built a career defined by one challenge after another. A Union Army veteran, Columbia College grad, and blessed with a rare talent for public office, he went on to become a Texas state senator, then lieutenant governor, judge, lawman, and even squeezed in time to write for newspapers. That mix of strong voices and tough decisions earned him allies and enemies who'd stop at nothing. Everything seemed under control until February 1896. Fountain set out from Lincoln toward Mesilla in the New Mexico Territory, bringing along his 8-year-old son, Henry. His mission was to clamp down on the cattle rustlers prowling the region, an enterprise tied to some very powerful pockets and bruised egos. Despite repeated warnings about potential ambushes, he rode on without a second thought. The last person to spot them was a mail rider who noticed they were being discreetly tailed by a few horsemen, and then they vanished. A few days later, Fountain's wagon turned up abandoned. A blood-stained handkerchief on the seat became the only clue in a case with no leads, no bodies, and no answers. News of their disappearance spread like wildfire, fueling headlines and hushed rumors in saloons for decades. Official investigations came and went, but no one was ever charged. The theories vary as much as the gossip. Some claim hired guns working for big ranchers plotted the whole thing. Others point the finger at outlaw Blackjack Ketchum. But the name that sparks the fiercest debate is Oliver Lee, a federal marshal and land investor, who was tried for allegedly kidnapping Henry. Lee's acquittal didn't close the book. If anything, it deepened the mystery and kept alive the question still echoing across the desert: who silenced Albert Fountain and his son? Henry Plummer's hidden fortune. Back in 1863, when nobody bothered digging into a sheriff candidate's past, Bannock, Montana handed the badge to Henry Plummer. On the surface, he looked like the perfect guy to keep order in that booming mining town. But behind that friendly face was a trail of murder rumors that would have made any community hit the brakes. Plummer didn't waste time rolling out his own brand of justice. He hired deputies in his image. Guys who were good at getting things done, but more practiced in crooked tricks than upholding the law. The last honest marshal from the previous administration tried to push back, but he ended up shot dead. Nobody ever figured out who pulled the trigger, and the town was left with nothing but rumors. Before he even took office, Plummer made a surprising move. He married Electa Bryan. Some folks thought he was settling down. The skeptics said it was just the calm before the storm. Turns out the calm didn't last long. Armed with authority and a keen nose for easy money, Plummer turned his badge into a ticket to crime. While miners pried gold nuggets out of Bannock's hard ground, he'd seize entire shipments on flimsy excuses. He had a method. Once he'd collected enough to overload a mule, he'd vanish into the hills, bury the stash in some secret spot, then come back acting like nothing had happened. Stories about those hidden caches have been floating around for generations. Some say there's $200,000 worth of gold dust near Birdtail Rock. Others talk about nuggets buried along a creek that feeds into the Sun River. There are whispers of $50,000 stolen from a stagecoach sleeping by Cottonwood Creek, and another $300,000 resting somewhere in the hills near Cascade. To this day, no probe, no detector, and no dreamer has ever laid hands on a single grain of those fortunes. Sometime in the 1880s, up in the dry Colorado mountains, QuiJo was born. His mom Native American and his dad a mystery. From the start, he never really fit in. No tribe would claim him, and the white settlers pushing westward wouldn't accept him either. Rumors about his early years were already soaked in blood. They say he killed his half-brother Avot to avenge another family murder. Branded a brother slayer, QuiJo left the mountains and drifted down to a still-developing Las Vegas, a town full of saloons, quick bets, and trouble lurking around every corner. That's where his name took on weight. Between cheap whiskey and dusty streets, any unsolved crime got pinned on QuiJo. Parents warned their kids at dusk, "Behave or he'll get you." A $2,000 reward was slapped on his head, enough to lure fortune hunters, but no one ever brought him in. Decades later, in February 1940, workers near the brand-new Hoover Dam stumbled on a dried-up body with a rare double row of teeth. Authorities didn't hesitate. It was the legendary fugitive. Word spread fast, and soon the Elks Club in Las Vegas turned the find into a sideshow. They rebuilt the cave where the remains lay and charged curious folks to gape at the monster. But the display didn't last long. Amid thefts, trades, and general neglect, QuiJo's bones vanished. Only a few fragments made it back to the authorities years later, and nobody knows where the rest ended up, keeping the legend of the man with no home alive. When Pancho Villa's name comes up in Mexico's collective memory, it carries the weight of adventures that blur the line between myth and reality. From outlaw on the run to strategic leader of the Mexican Revolution, his story left the country with stunning victories and controversies that still spark debates. Years after laying down his arms, Francisco Villa tried to trade battlefield marches for the quiet rhythm of farm life in Chihuahua. He looked ready to grow crops, not legends. But in 1923, a sudden attack ended his days, sealing a fate that would keep raising questions. The real twist started after his death. Buried in Hidalgo del Parral, his tomb was broken into 3 years later. The act wasn't just bold, it was macabre. The revolutionary's head vanished, kicking off a mystery that's lasted decades. Some remains stayed behind, but nobody could say for sure if they really belonged to the legendary fighter. Family accounts only deepened the intrigue. Villa's granddaughter claimed other bones went missing during a 1976 exhumation, when the government moved some remains to the monument to the revolution. Ever since, people have wondered what part of Villa really rests there. One theory stands out. Fearing more attacks, his widow supposedly had what was left of him quietly removed and swapped with an unidentified woman's remains. If that rumor's true, the mystery just changed addresses, now lurking in secret vaults and private collections. Odd clues keep the uncertainty alive. Over in El Paso, a pawn shop once tried to sell what was claimed to be Villa's trigger finger for $9,500. And wilder theories suggest Yale's secret society Skull and Bones might have bought his head as a prestige trophy. A ship in the desert? The Colorado Desert spreads out like a sea of dunes, the setting for a legend that's intrigued travelers for generations. A lost Spanish galleon, first spotted in the late 1800s. In November 1870, a treasure hunter claimed he'd found the ship and took his story to the Los Angeles Star. A few weeks later, Charlie Klusker said he'd seen the same vessel, amazingly well preserved. Those sightings never produced solid proof, but the tale picked up a spicy twist. The galleon was actually a pirate ship loaded with loot. The question remains, how did a Spanish hull end up so far from the sea? The answer might lie in the landscape's shifting face. Not far off, the Salton Sink once formed a huge temporary lake that rose and fell with the climate. In the San Felipe Mountains, ancient oyster beds reveal that this dry land was once underwater. Some historians think the galleon sailed up the Gulf of California, ran aground in the newly formed lake, then got buried by sand when the water vanished. If that's true, the crew probably didn't survive the brutal heat, leaving the ship as a silent witness. The lack of evidence only stokes the curiosity. Treasure hunters keep scouring the area, lured by the promise of silver coins and sealed chests. Rumors multiply, each adding fresh details. But no shovel or metal detector has ever brought the galleon to light. And it's precisely that absence that keeps the legend alive. After all, who knows what other relics lie beneath the sand, waiting for the next expedition?